There we go. Okay, so we're here today to talk about how AWS can help facilitate a sort of DevOps culture within your organization, and how sort of there's a kind of natural fit between using cloud technologies and with tools and technologies like AWS. So before we sort of get going, so just a bit about myself. So the CTO here at Basic Services, have a sort of very long history in open source and cloud technologies, have sort of been working in, particularly in the sort of cloud space for the last 5 or 6 years, sort of focusing heavily on Amazon sort of cloud technologies, but just sort of open source in general. Have a very strong development background, so really bring a lot of the, I guess, dev principles to how we manage cloud infrastructure, and working with development teams who are, coming to grips with the fast-pacing change of cloud technology. So Basic Services is an Australian company that provides DevOps as a managed service. And really strong history in cloud technology. Yep. And also really, understand the sort of the challenges that companies face in sort of bridging the gap between development and operations. So really understanding how to really take advantage of cloud technologies to really accelerate how you develop, deliver, and maintain applications. So I guess a bit of kind of a bit of thinking around, traditional approaches to development and traditional approaches to operations have really been about, traditional thinking is, developers' jobs, this to add new features and new functions to an application, right? And an operations role is really about making sure, that the application or the system is reliable, and it is performing as well as it can. But really, it's really not about adding new features, and it's really not about keeping the site stable and fast. What it's really about is basically how their roles are really about enabling their business. Right? It's really about how do they facilitate what the business requires, and that's from a dev's perspective and from an ops perspective as well. And really the business requires change, right? In any modern organisation that's sitting still, they're really they really start to struggle. It's really about enabling change within the organisation, and as we all know, change. There's a real challenge to all businesses that need to react to rapid change. And as we all know, change is one of the major causes of problems, of outages, right? So, if we could keep everything the same, it's really quite a straightforward process to keep, a system running and keep it operating. But if a business requires rapid change, change is the #1 cause of most system outages, right? So it's fairly common. So that's where that challenge comes, where the challenge becomes, it's the operations team is tasked with making sure there isn't an outage, whereas the development team is about, okay, well, we need to deliver new functions and new features to the business. How do we do that? How do we do that and keep everything stable and reliable? So you've got a choice, really. You can discourage change in the interest of stability, right? So that's in it's sort of a traditional thinking approach, right? It's about okay, well, we'll make sure that when changes happen, that they happen they once every 6 months, right? We do a change. It's and it's a big bang, and it's causes lots of pain, but we only do it twice a year, so that's okay. Or really, and this is I guess a more a more accepted way of thinking, is that we just allow change to happen, as often as it needs to. So let's react, right? Let's be able to react to change. So how do we do that? So how do we make sure that we're able to react to change when it needs to happen and still maintain, still maintain stability and reliability? One of the big things that it takes to be able to react to change and to be able to deal with change is really about, it's a cultural thing. You know, there's tools and technologies and processes that can help you do that. Without the right culture within your organization to be able to react to change, you know, you're really going to struggle. And you know, it's about making sure that, you know, in the sort of DevOps world, really the number one challenge that most organizations are facing is really a cultural change, right? And so to be able to succeed, you know, you really need to be able to do that. So how do we enable change? So I guess these are some key points really about processes and tools that can help you facilitate change. So one of those is automation, right? So automation is one of the key things that can help speed up change, and also really automation is a real key aspect around repeatability, right? So if we can automate something, then we can make it repeatable. Then we can do it quickly, and we can do it with minimal interaction, right? And that's where we can get efficiencies in terms of speed, in terms of resource utilization, things like that. Another key aspect is continuous integration. So, you know, probably a lot of us have, you know, quite familiar with continuous integration and I guess more recently continuous delivery. But really, it's not just about, you know, we're very comfortable with continuous integration from an application standpoint, right? You know, a lot of organizations have been doing sort of continuous integration, you know, constantly building and, you know, in some cases automating the testing of their application. But it's really not, in a DevOps thinking world, it's really not just about the application code anymore. It's really about the infrastructure as well. So it's making sure that not only are we constantly testing the changes to our application, but we're also constantly testing and deploying the changes to our infrastructure. And another key aspect of that is making sure that infrastructure changes, that the way that you design infrastructure sort of in sort of cloud technologies is that you go with the minimum amount of infrastructure that you need. And that's where the acronym JEDI comes from. Really, it's really about just enough developed infrastructure. And there's a key word in that, and that's developed, right? Developed infrastructure. Making sure that you have you apply the same development practices that we've been applying to application code, that we apply those same practices and processes to our infrastructure code. Another key thing that helps us facilitate change is really about the size of the changes. If we can make deploying changes quickly and easy through automation and make it reliable through continuous integration, then we can deliver changes in smaller chunks faster. Right? So we don't have to do big bang deployments anymore. We don't have to, you know, have an entire weekend of a team of 20 people doing a deployment, right? A deployment should be able to happen in the middle of the day, and it should just be normal. It should be a normal practice because it's a small change and it's gone through a defined process. And another key aspect of small changes is small changes are easily rolled back. In most cases, small changes, if the change doesn't go according to plan, because it's only a small change, it's usually a relatively straightforward process to back that change out, as opposed to a big bang where the really only option you have is to roll forward on a change, right, and actually fix it. So that's kind of a key aspect of that. A really kind of a key element of that is really about understanding when failures happen, right? Failures are a reality of the world that we work in, right? And so one of the key aspects of this is being able to detect those failures as quickly as possible and react to them. Whether that be, in the case of a deployment, roll it back, or in the case, of infrastructure failures, detecting that and being able to automatically provision, replacements or bringing up new instances, all those kinds of things. So, how does AWS help facilitate these ways of thinking and these ways of working? So, how can we leverage what Amazon Web Services brings to the table in terms of thinking about this? So, really, Amazon and cloud technologies in general really kind of changed the way that we think about infrastructure. Previously, we would have gone out and had to provision and buy hardware or even provision virtual machines technology, but really, and that's been more of a manual process. It's been an operations team, an infrastructure team being tasked with actually doing this. What Amazon has enabled is a development approach to doing that. Everything in every interaction that you have with Amazon is via some API, even if you happen to be just using their web interface. It's via some API, right? So it's really changed the way that you create infrastructure and the way you think about infrastructure, and it facilitates automation at a fundamental level. And Amazon provides a core number of technologies that really help in the automation space, right? So they provide tools like CloudFormation, right? So no more, manually creating an environment. No more, even in an Amazon space, no using a UI to build an environment. It's about defining your infrastructure from a declarative standpoint. So CloudFormation provides, a declarative language that basically allows you to describe what your infrastructure looks like, how pieces interact with the dependencies within that environment. And I guess the key aspect of that is because it's essentially code that it's very easily version controlled, right? So you can just version control alongside your application code. And not only that, it gives you the ability to actually diff your infrastructure, right? To say, well, what changed, right? This comes back to the failure detection. Okay, well, what changed in my infrastructure that caused this failure? And by making sure that you have that version control, you can essentially diff your infrastructure and say, well, okay, this particular element was introduced, and this particular element caused the problem. So it's that traceability. It comes down to it's much easier to detect those differences and maintain those differences, as opposed to, I guess, a traditional kind of, in a traditional ITSM world where the change would be tracked through, through your ticketing system or through your change control system. But the reality is that relies on, the actual person making sure that they've gone in and provided that information. But if you're actually source controlling your infrastructure, you actually have, a codified difference that you can go in and check. And then there are other tools that Amazon provides to help with automation as well. So they provide tools like OpsWork, or alternatively you can use Chef or Puppet natively. It really doesn't matter necessarily, and there are other technologies that fit into that category as well, like Ansible and Salt Stack, for example. But it really doesn't necessarily matter what tool you choose. It's really about changing the way that you think about provisioning your infrastructure, right? It's making sure that you've got a well-defined, repeatable way. And the key thing is the common thing that we come back to when we talk about this stuff is stop treating your infrastructure as as pets and start treating it like cattle, right? So that if it's broken, you basically shoot it and get another one. There are a number of other tools that can kind of help define your process. So Amazon provides Simple Workflow, which is basically just a sort of task management and workflow tool for helping you track things, and it can help you automate your deployment processes and even if to the point where you still have a manual kind of approval process for deploying stuff into production, but that can be automated, so it's essentially a click of a button as opposed to logging into a server and running some scripts. So a Simple Workflow can help in that area. And the other thing I guess key tool around in the automation space is leveraging Route 53 in terms of DNS. So basically automating, the deployment of a new site and then updating DNS records to sort of make that site live. So you can kind of use that as a way to easily, if you can deploy a complete new set of infrastructure, point DNS records at it, and then if that deployment doesn't go well, you can easily just swap back to the old environment, and you're done. Really, the fundamental principle around automation is, if you can't automate it, then you probably shouldn't be doing it, right? So that's really the key thing. So think about what you're doing, because as soon as you you add a manual process to what to your task, that becomes the single point, that becomes a single bottleneck, and that I've seen that happen in a lot of organizations. Is they we'll just put this manual process in for now, and that becomes the critical path and the critical bottleneck to deployments. They back up, and then you end up with not being able to deploy small incremental changes anymore. You go back to kind of big bang changes. So how does AWS how can it help in the continuous integration and delivery space? Well, one of the nice things really is that you can tie your continuous integration pipeline into the sort of Amazon ecosystem, so that every commit can trigger a change, which can trigger the provisioning of a brand new environment, including all of the infrastructure, deploying the application, running whatever automated tests you have, running whatever manual tests you might still have, and all in an automated fashion, right? So that you can basically, if you've got a manual testing team, they can just focus on testing the application. They don't have to focus on getting a build and getting it deployed and all those other aspects. They can simply just be notified that here's a new environment for them to go and test. Also, the sort of nice thing that about sort of cloud infrastructure in generally is about the ability to define a repeatability in terms of what software you're testing, what infrastructure you're testing that against. So in this case, Amazon machine images can be really useful in this space, because essentially as part of your continuous integration process, you can actually be spinning them up, provisioning them using whatever provisioning technology you've got, whether it be it Chef, Puppet, or whatever. Testing that stack, that complete stack, and then taking that as your deployable artifact, right? So the Amazon machine image, AMI, really becomes the thing that you're testing, and the thing that you're moving through from your test environment to your staging environment to your production environment, right? And it's completely tested. So it's repeatable, right? So it's something the full stack. It's not, when we get to production, it's slightly different to our testing environment, because we've got this other software stack that we're running over here. It's about creating like-for-like environments and having that confidence in what you've actually tested is actually what's going to be running in production, right? So that's really the key thing, and it's also gives you the opportunity that dev teams and the ops teams are essentially doing it the same way, right? So they're using the same tools. So the developer's development environment is exactly the same as production in terms of the software stack, in terms of where the application server is located, right? They have exactly the same locations. They're very comfortable working with that environment. And you're testing, the developers are essentially testing that provisioning code. So using tools like Vagrant to basically spin up a local VM that is an exact replica and is provisioned using exactly the same Chef recipes, for example, that they are working the same way, and that they're testing not only the application code but also the provisioning and infrastructure code. Spinning up dev environments in AWS and using the same provisioning tools to do that. And I guess a key aspect of this is really that testing testing and automation in testing is really important to be able to accelerate the amount of the time from the time that a change is made, that the change is committed to the change, the time that change is propagated, into production, right? So by having as much automation around testing means that you can really accelerate that process. So, small incremental changes, right? That's another, I guess, another key aspect of the process, right? So it's about simplifying the deployment process. So AMIs are your deployable artifacts, right? So that's sort of what I highlighted previously. It's really about using an AMI as the unit of deployment. So no longer is my application code, no longer is my WAR file or my Ruby, the Ruby code or whatever. No longer is that what I'm deploying. I'm actually deploying a machine image, right? That has been built and tested by our CI process. And then you can leverage tools like CloudFormation using a stack update to actually deploy those changes, those infrastructure changes, and then the ability to roll that back if that fails, right? So in some cases that can be automated, right? The key thing is to make deploying fast. Make it easy to deploy, right? It should have little or no manual task involved in doing a deployment, right? It should be as automated as much as possible. It may be that that process is initiated manually, right? But the reality is that it shouldn't be, it shouldn't require a dev or an ops person to go and log into a server and actually manually run an update. It should be an externally controlled and managed task. You should be able to, sit at your desk, click a button, or run some build job to trigger that off. So one of the key aspects to sort of work effectively in this way is really about making sure that you know what's going on, right? That you know what's happening in your environment. So that's the ability to detect failures, right? Detect things when things are going wrong before they actually go wrong, right? So one of the key things is to make sure that you monitor absolutely everything, right? And make sure that you're not only, are you're monitoring like server stuff, but you're also monitoring the application. That the application itself has been written in such a way that it's exposing what it's doing, right? So how it's interacting with this environment. So making sure that you've instrumented your application in such a way that it's spitting out metrics. It's spitting out the number of concurrent users, or it's spitting out the number of requests, or it's spitting out metric data about internal performance. Metric data that can be collected and fed to tools like CloudWatch, right? So that we can use Amazon's CloudWatch, which is basically, provides sort of at least initial kind of basic level monitoring of cloud infrastructure, of your AWS infrastructure, but also, you can add custom metrics to it, and that's a key thing. So you can start to feed that in, and you can start to do alerting off that. But also, I guess another key thing is make sure that even if you're not leveraging those that metric data right now, that you're collecting it, right? Because at some point in time, somebody in the business is going to come and ask you a question about, some aspect of the system in terms of what it's doing, how many users do we have on the system on this day at a given time. You're going to want to know that, right? You're going to want to have that information on hand. You may not have a use case for it right now, but trust me, you probably will at some point in time. And then if you have that data, that's when you can start to use tools like Elastic MapReduce, right? So that that's where you can start to ask arbitrary queries across a data set that may not be so structured, right? As long as you've got that data and you've collected it, and you can feed it into tools like EMR, then you can start to ask quite unique and questions about what's going on and about correlating various parts of your system, right? So I guess that's another key aspect is in terms of that is make sure you've thought about the process of, okay, how am I collecting data, and how am I going to correlate all this data from different parts of the system? So using tools and techniques to help do that. So key transaction monitoring, things like that. So making sure there's some unique identifiable information that travels through the various aspects of your application that can allow you to track that. Right. So it just takes that bit of thinking up front about how you do that. So I'm just going to quickly go through a quick scenario in terms of, a classical kind of, this is something that we see very regular with some of our customers in terms of, the struggle they have in coming to terms with, trying to work smarter in a kind of more DevOps style. So we've got a scenario of an application that's being developed by a team, by a dev team, and they're running it in AWS. So basically, you've got some awesome developers, that are working really hard. They're really, you've got some pretty talented, pretty awesome developers, but they're working really hard. They're working to tight timelines. As I don't know if I've ever not worked to tight timelines, but there's a lot of work. They're doing late nights. They're doing quick code releases to get stuff out. Right. So then you go live, right? And because you've been totally focused on delivery, that the development team suddenly starts to look after the environment in terms of supporting it, right? So it diverts their focus away from their dev work, right? They've also probably because they've been working with AWS, they've probably had they're probably familiar with some infrastructure stuff, but they may not have ever looked after a production system from a support perspective, as part of their daily job. So, they're probably not so focused on security, and optimizations are probably being missed. And you're probably starting to, find that you're getting some, production issues, some outages and stuff like that, just because, the speed at which you're working. So what happens next? So you've got your dev team, they're on call 24/7, they're getting call outs at 3 a.m. in the morning, so it's impacting on the developers' time because they're having to work on those. They're coming in late and tired because they've been up all night fixing issues. They're missing the sort of project deliveries, and then, the project starts to slip in terms of delivering new functionality. So what do? So probably what you do is you go and hire an ops guy, right? So you got to find one. Trust me, it's pretty hard to find good ops people. They're in most cases they're a traditional ops thinking type person. They're used to working a certain way. They're not following the practice and processes that were originally set out by the developers. You've got one ops guy supporting a system. They're working 24/7. They're getting sick. They basically start to introduce kind of roadblocks in terms of their time, and when they get fed up with it all, they leave, right? And so you go through that cycle again. Or you hire two, right? And then that gives you a little bit of coverage and so on. So how can Base2 Services help? So Base2 Services is a cloud-focused managed service provider, but the reality is our background as an organization really comes from, we have a very strong development and integration background, right? So we've been building applications and deploying them to cloud infrastructure, but now really kind of focusing on the support and service and managed service provider space. But really, we have that strong understanding and kind of that same way of thinking in terms of in terms of application development as we do to how we run our support team. So really, it's about as a team, it's about working closely with the customer and with their team primarily, right? And really to work with them on making sure that they're getting the efficiencies, that the performance of their system is as good as it could be. From a cloud infrastructure point of view, that they're running with the minimum amount of infrastructure required to meet their requirements, right? So it's making sure that they can take advantage of cloud infrastructure, right? So if they've got a particular workload that suits elastic scalability, that's tuned to appropriately, right? Basically, the way that we work with our customers is really about understanding and being an extension to the team, right? So being able to work with you on architecture aspects, and also work very closely with the developers to really establish those processes, right? To really establish the processes in and around delivery of a project. One of the key things that that we kind of pride ourselves on is having really talented people, and talented people that really understand cloud technology and understand AWS, right? So really, that's a fundamental thing for us. Everyone within the organisation has some level of AWS certification. That extends all the way, to from the ops team all the way up to the sales team. So continuous integration, coming from a really strong application background and really understanding the value that that continuous integration and continuous delivery can bring, not from a development perspective, but also now from a operations perspective as well, right? So it's making sure that when we're working with a customer, that the developers are going through that process. They're not shortcutting that. They're making sure that everything's going through the CI pipeline, that it's well tested, and that that they can deploy to production whenever they want, basically, right? They've got the process defined, and also that we kind of really make sure that all the appropriate checkpoints are put in place prior to a release, so that we can do that. We can fail back fast, right? So that's the whole thing. We work with them, whether that's actually doing a production deployment by spinning up an entire new environment, being able to cut over to that environment and then cut back, or even do A/B style deployments or canary testing where we're feeding some of the traffic to the new site. So we work with the customer on making sure that we can establish those processes and react to those changes. I guess a primary area that we focus on really is about performance review, right? So we constantly work with the developers, right? We constantly work with them on making sure finding potential performance issues around their application, helping them pinpoint specific issues around that that they can improve. It might be that that might actually require code changes, right, for them to do that, and we'll work with them on providing them with as much information as we can to help them do that, right? And for example, being able to detect slow queries in databases and working with them on how to fix that, right? So we work very, very closely, and that's a large part of the huge value that we bring is being able to very quickly detect, a customer does a deployment, we see a change in the response time to the application, and we see that go down, right? So we'll immediately jump on that, have a look at why that's happening, and then provide that feedback to the customer in terms of getting them to be able to react to that change particularly quickly.